Welcome, welcome, welcome in, everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with CarePatrol, where education is the heart of everything that we do. Happy Friday to y'all. I appreciate you joining us. I know Fridays can be so very busy. Hello, Chloe Tilley. Thank you for speaking. And everyone, please know that you can unmic as well as use the chat room to introduce yourselves and ask questions and share ideas, get to know each other. I hope you consider it a safe place. That's the goal that we have here, as well as to educate and enrich you professionally, if not also personally. So thank you for joining Care Concierge today with Care Patrol. We have a number of people still coming in, so I'm going to move ahead in the presentation to our housekeeping notes. We are accredited by the Alabama Board of Nursing Practitioners to offer CEUs, continuing education units. We're also accredited by the Alabama Board of Social Work Examiners to offer continuing education units. And we are able to offer these as live or face-to-face CEUs because we use a survey process with a password protected survey. And the reason we do that is to show the boards that you've been here and participated and shared perhaps and have joined and earned your certificate. So we give the password out about 12:45 today, and throughout our presentation, we hope that you will join in the discussion either by the chat room or by unmuting. And I know that not everyone is comfortable speaking in public, but if you are, please know that you're welcome to do so. We upload to the Alabama Board of Nursing Practitioners website the nursing hours. That's part of our value to you and part of their request of us, actually. And then we provide everyone a certificate, social workers, nurses, and other clinicians who may be joining us. And you'll find those typically reciprocal among states and often between, clinical areas. So thank y'all for joining us. CarePatrol is a referral and assessment firm, and placement firm. And what that means is that we receive word from clients either directly or through referrals from folks like you, and we meet with them and assess their needs. And if their needs may include sitters in the home or looking at community living, like assisted living, then we share those providers with them that meet their needs and then tour with them like a realtor would do. So that's our value to them. And our value to you as referral sources is that we take that off your plate. And we go to all the buildings quite often because we tour them. So we know maybe more about who's there and who isn't in terms of staffing or management changes or what type of patient population they currently have. So I'm hoping you all see the value in that. And hopefully you also see the value in our continuing education. As I stated earlier, we use a evaluation process that's password protected, and that evaluation is a link to Surveymonkey. Some of you I know participate by phone or are otherwise, doing whatever you're doing, but aren't available to see the screen. And so I'm going to read to you the Surveymonkey evaluation link that you'll need to go to after the conclusion of this presentation using your password to complete in order to receive your certificate and your contact hour. So the evaluation link is https://www.surveymonkey.com/8 as in zoo, T as in Tom, H, K, G as in girl, M as in Mary. And those are all capitalized letters. And one more time, I know we're still admitting folks in who may not have heard the link, and there may be others who weren't able to get to a notepad quickly enough or on your phone. So let me once again read for you the address to the Surveymonkey Evaluation, which you must complete in order to receive your contact hour, but you must listen for the password to do so. The link is https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/ all uppercase letters, the number 8, Z as in zoo, T as in Tom, H, K, G as in girl, M as in Mary. That is our evaluation link. I've also posted it in the chat room. If you'll read up the chat, you'll see it there. And I'm posting it again now. If you're not familiar with the chat room or how to use it, just take your cursor and slide it up to the top of your screen. And if nothing happens, slide it down. But in either direction, there should be a little black sort of block that pops up. And on that block is written chat. Click that and the chat room pops up. So we'll get started now with suicide, our topic for today, as we continue and complete our September focus on mental health issues. In October, we're going to focus solely on clinical issues delivered by clinicians. If you read in the chat room on October 10, which is a Monday, we're going to have Phyllis Grauer, a PharmD and longtime hospice consultant and business owner, who will discuss for us geropharmacy. So any of you who work with an aging population may find this highly interesting. Phyllis Grauer is an accomplished person. If you were to Google her, you would see many mentions about her. I'm very pleased and honored that she agreed to speak for us, and I'm hoping that as many of you will turn up as you can. So again, we return on October 10. Today is the completion of our September focus on mental health. Our topic has been, or will be today, suicide. And we have, as always, 3 objectives, which are on the evaluation. One is we're going to sort of define and discuss the issue of suicide in a pretty broad sense. 2, we're going to list world religious views of suicide, because I think that may be interesting to some of you. And then 3, we're going to learn data around the risk factors and prevention of suicide. And that's with an asterisk, let's say. So who is this, y'all, in this photograph? Those of you who can see the screen, who is this a photograph of? Y'all can holler out on your mics. You can unmute at any time or enter in the chat room. Does anybody have a guess who this person is? Last week, our last session, we did the mental illness in the homeless population. Is this who I've photographed and placed here, or is it someone else? Does anyone know who this is a photograph of? And as you mull it over, I'll tell you, people of all genders and races and ages and ethnicities are at risk and can be at risk for suicide. The main risk factors are, first of all, a history of other suicide attempts. Depression and other mental disorders, as well as substance use disorders, play a large part in suicide. Those who suffer chronic pain and those who have family histories of mental disorders, substance abuse, physical, sexual abuse, exposure to violence, family histories of suicide, all of these folks are at risk for suicide. When we notice the presence of guns or other firearms in the home, we see that may be a potential risk. Well, it is a risk for someone who is contemplating or thinking about suicide. Chris Cornell, Jasmine, Sasha, Chris Cornell. Yay. I'm glad y'all know that. If you don't know who he is, Chris Cornell was the lead singer of a band in the 90s called Soundgarden. They were sort of part of that Seattle explosion with Nirvana. They formed, or he sang with Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam in a band called Temple of the Dog. And then he later, Chris Cornell, was both a soloist and sang with Tom Morello, who was of Rage Against the Machine, and their band Audio Slave. And Chris Cornell, if you've not heard him, some songs that may come to mind are Black Hole Sun. You may have heard that, but the man had an incredible voice, very powerful, and a great range and a perfect rock and roll voice. And by the way, he could shred the guitar. And so he was quite the force. And I bring him up for this reason. One of the things that may lead to suicide attempts or place one at higher risk would be exposure to a suicide, an effective suicide, other suicidal behavior, including not only family members and peers, but Chris Cornell, who hanged himself in 2017. Now, I'm someone who's had severe depression. I forget the clinical term, and I should know that. It's Mental Health Month. But for most of my adult life, and had at times suicidal ideation. And I must say that when Chris Cornell died, it affected me because I had thought so much of him and his talent that to think that he would remove himself from the world was very impactful to me. And that's why I bring him up. And I wonder, has suicide ever touched you in a similar way? And please, if it has touched you directly with a child or family member, I do not ask and do not want you to speak up unless you feel so compelled. I'm really asking more in the tertiary sense. Has ever a hearing of suicide affected your thought about suicide? Maybe not suicidal ideation in your own, but affected you or impacted you in some way. And again, you can always unmute. We'd love to hear you have and start a discussion, or you can answer in the chat room. Suicide is when people harm themselves with the goal of ending their life, and they succeed. Kimberly, you have. Thank you. If you want to share, Chloe, more, if y'all want to share more, we'd love to hear it. That's what makes this class and course, I think, dynamic, is that we hear from you who are peers to one another about your experiences. But if you don't want to share more than that, thank you for sharing what you did. A suicide attempt is when someone harms themselves with the goal of ending their life, but they do not die. E. Claiborne. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Kelvin, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it's impacted me too, as you know. And it's an impactful thing, and it's maybe larger than you think. We do want to be politically correct these days. At least we want to make that effort. And so now clinicians are saying that we should avoid using terms like committing suicide or successful suicide or a failed suicide attempt, because these are shaming to the persons who are hearing those words and may further place them at risk. So when you sort of boil it down, there's no underlying pathophysiology for suicide. Ms. Smith, oh no. Granddaughter was bullied at school. Ugh. I picked a heavy topic, y'all. I apologize. Thank you for bearing with us. It's obviously an interplay of behavioral and socioeconomic and psychological and family of origin and other issues. We do know, or we have seen through autopsy, that there are low levels of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, that is directly associated with suicide and indirectly associated through being present in those who have major depression, PTSD, schizophrenia, and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Post-mortem studies have found reduced levels of BDNF in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex in those who both have and do not have, or did not have, psychiatric conditions. Serotonin is believed to be low in those that commit suicide, and that is evidenced by reduced levels of 5-hydroxyindoleacetic acid in the cerebral spinal fluid. But direct evidence is hard to obtain. If any of you know of any direct clinical evidence about the pathophysiology of suicide, please share it. It'd be wonderful to see. Suicide worldwide is the 10th leading cause of death. About 1.5% of all deaths worldwide are by suicide, which is about 12 people for every 100,000 people. Suicide rates are higher among men than women, 1.5 times higher in developing countries, 3.5 times higher in the US and the developed world. Worldwide, every religion has I wouldn't say even a law, but has a directive, let's say, about suicide. Now, we're all bound by religion, whether we're religious or not. In Theravada Buddhism, if a monk were to in any way praise death or the next life, or in any way condition the listener to commit suicide, it would be a breach of their highest monastic code, and they would be automatically expelled from the monastery. In Hinduism, which really predates and gave birth in many ways to Buddhism, suicide is spiritually unacceptable. It's considered a violation of the code of ahimsa, and ahimsa is the code of nonviolence, which is what Mahatma Gandhi followed in his protest that actually led to MLK following that in the United States. And therefore, because it's a violation of the code of ahimsa in Hinduism, suicide is just as sinful as murdering another. Some scriptures in Hinduism state that to die by suicide results in becoming a ghost, wandering the earth until the time as such you would have otherwise died. And Mahabharata, which is a long volume, really almost a play in Hinduism, talks of suicide, stating that those who commit it can never attain to regions and of heaven, in parentheses, that are blessed, which is really, they don't have a concept of heaven in the sense that the West does, but they nonetheless say that you cannot enter their concept if you commit suicide. And in Jainism, which is maybe the biggest religion you haven't heard of, which is also in India, suicide is regarded as the worst type of himsa, which is violence. Ahimsa, nonviolence. Himsa, violence. It's not permitted. Nonviolence is the fundamental doctrine of Jainism. Jainist, if you would spot one in the population if you were in India, because they would be wearing rags, barefoot, with no possessions, eating, trash. They will not eat insects or swat insects. They are completely nonviolent. They take the concept of leave no trace to the nth degree. They turn it up to 11. And for them, suicide is a major violation. Now, oddly, there's no express warrant condemning suicide in the Bible. There are persons mentioned in the Bible who die by suicide, and their mentions are generally described in negative context. Psalm 37, verses 14 and 15 describes the wicked as falling on their own swords. And Zimri is described as, who committed suicide, as having died for his sins which he committed, doing evil in the eyes of Yahweh. Now, according to the theology of the Roman Catholic Church, suicide is objectively a sin, and it violates the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. However, the Catechism of the Catholic Church in 1992 stated that we should not despair of the eternal salvation of persons who have taken their own lives. By ways known to him alone, God can provide the opportunity for salutary repentance. The church prays for persons who have taken their own lives. Now, suicide in the Eastern Orthodoxy, which is when the church split from the Roman Catholic Church to the Eastern Orthodoxy, but they had the same parent in the Church of Paul. The tradition of the rejection of suicide is a rejection of God's gift of life. It's a failure of stewardship. Think about that concept. We are stewards of our bodies and our lives. We are meant to give our talents to the world. This is true whether you're Eastern Orthodox or not. And that, again, thou shalt not kill is the underwriting thought in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, evangelicals and Protestants and charismatics and Pentecostals all say that it is murder. Suicide is self-murder. And so anyone who commits it is sinning, and that is the same as if the person murdered someone else.
I'm sorry. That's okay. The heat is welcome.
Hey, Sandra, did you have something to say? Or did you unmute by mistake? Sandra? I'll keep going. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, also sometimes known as the Mormon Church, generally views suicide as wrong, although they think that the victim may be considered not responsible for the act of suicide, depending on the circumstances. Oops.
I started.
Sandra?
I'm tied. I apologize.
Sandra? Okay, y'all, I'm not sure how to unmute, so let's see, here she is. Okay, sorry about that. Islam clearly forbids suicide. It is in the Quran, and the Quran says, do not kill yourself. Surely God is most merciful to you. And in statements that are attributed to Muhammad, which is called the Hadith, for example, Muhammad, the prophet, said, he who commits suicide by throttling, which is strangulation, shall keep on throttling himself in the hell fire forever. And he who commits suicide by stabbing himself shall keep on stabbing himself in the hell fire. Many Muslim scholars and many Muslim clerics consider suicide forbidden, including suicide attacks. I think that's important to point out for anyone who may be on the call or is in our state who is Islamic. Suicide is prohibited in their faith. Suicides are frowned upon in the Jewish faith. In fact, if you commit suicide, you would be buried in a separate part of the cemetery and possibly denied last rites. However, in the faith, the Jewish use every means to excuse the act, to say that the person maybe was out of their mind, or that the person must surely have repented just after performing the act, but just before death. However, assisting suicide for the Jewish faith is prohibited, which is interesting when you think about assisted suicide. I wouldn't expect to see many Jewish doctors practicing that. Suicide is most common worldwide over age 7. But in some countries, it's 15 to 30 who are high at risk. Attempts are more common among young people and women in the West. 10 to 20 million non-fatal attempted suicides occur every year, and nearly 800,000 people succeed. That's roughly one death every 40 seconds in our world due to suicide. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, say that women are more likely to attempt suicide in the US. Men are more likely to succeed because men are more likely to use lethal methods like a gun or hanging, which is how Chris Cornell died. He hanged himself. Women are more likely to overdose on prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs or some other type of poisoning. The rate of suicide death among preteens and younger teens, gratefully in the US, is lower than of older adolescents and adults, but it still ranks as the second cause of death among that age population of 10 to 14. And for people under 12, Black children have a higher rate of suicide than others, white children. And I assume all others. That's how I read the stat. What do y'all think is the most common method of people committing suicide? I know that's kind of a morose question, but I ask it just because I have a point. Does anybody want to weigh in, or do y'all want to pass on that? Ashley Tolbert says hanging. I can't imagine dying that way, certainly doing it myself. Pills, gunshot, I'm just guessing, overdose, guns, pills. Thank y'all for participating. I was starting to feel kind of out here on an island. Like I had taken y'all to a place you didn't quite want to go. Guns, hanging. Thank y'all for participating. Meds. Well, fact of the matter is firearms are used in more than 50% of suicides in the US, 52.8% to be precise, which is more than the others combined. Suffocation or hanging is second. About a quarter of suicide deaths occur by hanging. Poisoning is about 12%, about 1 in 8. And then there's other means. And if you see this graphic, oh, Ms. Najjar, a little late, but I just wanted to say, clarifying that suicide attacks are forbidden in Islam is great info because it goes to prove that extremist terrorists aren't really practicing Islam. Thank you for sharing and helping dispel stereotypes. You're very welcome, and it's very true. I worked for Muslim employers who were and lived in Muslim countries, and the people were divine. The most peaceful people I've ever been around. So just to show you the disparity between the world and the US with gun death, you can see that we're, about 2/3 down the list among high-income countries, to say the developed world. And our gun-related suicides are higher than our non-gun related. And the only people who I think even come close to our level of violence are in Finland and Austria, where gun deaths are maybe a fifth of their overall suicide deaths. In 2020, across the US, 12.2 million adults seriously considered suicide. 3.2 million made a plan. 1.2 million attempted suicide. And 45,979 people succeeded in ending their lives in 2020 by their own hands. To death every 11 minutes. So in the time I've been talking 30 minutes, approximately 125 Americans will die today by suicide. A male dies every 14.4 minutes, and a female every 55.9 minutes. Thank you, Keldon, for posting the survey. Out of every 100,000 Americans, 8 ER visits are related to suicide. 27 self-reported suicide attempts occur, and 275 people report seriously considering suicide. That's today. Middle-aged adults, 35 to 64, are almost half of all suicides in the US. It's the 9th leading cause of death in the US, 10th leading cause worldwide, 9th leading cause in the US, where handgun deaths or gun deaths make up over half of the suicides. Among middle-aged men, the suicide rates are highest for non-Hispanic, American Indian, or Alaska Native men, followed closely by non-Hispanic white men. They're both at roughly 36 and 35%. Among middle-aged women, suicide rates were highest among white women, and next, non-Hispanic, American Indian, or Alaska Native, at about 10 every 100,000. In old age, those who are 75 and older comprise only 10% of all the suicides in the US. But per 100,000, a higher incidence occurs of suicide attempts or successful suicide at 19.1 per 100,000. Men age 75 and older have the highest rate, 40.5, and older non-Hispanic white men have the highest suicide rate compared to all other ethnic groups at 47.8 per 100,000, which is what, 4.7%, something like that. You see that so much of our suicide deaths are in the aged. You think, well, I've always thought that suicide was a province of the young, not the aged, but it's actually the opposite. Youth and young adults account for 14% of suicides aged 10 to 24, 10.5 per 100,000. It's the 3rd leading cause of death. 6,643 people aged 10 to 24 took their own lives in 2020. For youth ages 10 to 14, suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death. In 2019, 9% of high school students said they had attempted suicide in the previous 12 months, which is more frequent among girls and among non-Hispanic, American Indian, Alaska Native students. 25%, 1 in 4. 1 in 4 non-Hispanic, American Indian, and Alaska Native students commit suicide. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual kids are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide their serious attempts that are medically serious are 4 times more likely than among their peer group of other young people. If you are also African American, Latino, Native American, Asian American, and lesbian, gay, or bisexual, then you are going to commit suicide at much higher rates than others. 41% of trans adults say they have attempted suicide. 61% of trans people have been victims of physical assault and thus been considered suicide. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual young people who come from families that reject them are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than those same children whose families accept them. We hear a great deal about PTSD among our service folks. Veterans have an adjusted suicide rate that is 52% greater than non-veterans. People who served account for about 13%, almost 14% of suicides among adults in the United States. In 2019, nearly 2% of former active duty service members reported making a suicide attempt, an increase by nearly a full percent from 10 years prior. When we look at folks who suffer a mental or physical challenge, we see that there's limited data in this population, but a survey in 2021 stated that adults with disabilities were 3 times more likely to report suicidal ideation in the past month compared to persons without. And it has been shown that there's increased mental distress among this population, which has also, mental distress has been shown to be a risk factor for suicide. Industries that have the highest rates of suicide, and this was an interesting statistic to me because I wouldn't think that suicide was an industry problem. But those in the mining and oil and gas industry have a 54.2 per 100,000 incidents of suicide. Construction at 45, other services, automotive repair, for example, 39. Agriculture. You see in the work where there's physical toil and labor, that there's a higher incidence of suicide than among so-called white-collar work. And I don't know what that means, but I do find it interesting. And suicide rates vary across geography, substantially across geography. So in a large metropolitan area like New York, you would see only about 11 people out of 100,000 attempt suicide or complete suicide. Whereas in a place like Birmingham, where we're, I think, a medium metro, at least in a medium market sense, you see fully 5 more people per 100,000 attempt suicide. And then when you get into non-metro areas, which is what much of Alabama is, you have 18 people per 100,000 attempt suicide. And if you get farther afield into the very rural areas, that number climbs to 20. Do y'all think that people threaten suicide to get attention? Does anyone think that people threaten suicide to get attention. It's plausible. It may be a cry for help. Yes or no? Candace Moss says maybe at times. Matthew Braxton says depends on the situation. Some people do. Thank you all for answering. There are actually certainly some who are attention seeking, but many do want to live and are crying out for help. Thank you, Amy. Let's see if we can get on. Most people who have the risk factors for suicide, thank you, Emily, will not attempt suicide. It's difficult to tell who will, though. So as Emily Scott so succinctly said, it should always be taken seriously. It should always be taken seriously, whether or not we think it is attention-seeking behavior. Warning signs that someone's at a higher risk and needs immediate attention would be some stressful life event of which you are aware that they have suffered, some legal trouble or loss of a loved one, some interpersonal stressor, such as discrimination, relationship troubles, or shame or harassment. Or other suicide risk factors that are coexistent with those would certainly put someone at an even higher risk. Mental illness at the time of suicide, depending on what you read, and there's a lot, ranges from a believed to be 27% to a believed to be 90% of the time mental illness is present at the time of suicide. Half of all people who die by suicide have a major depressive disorder. And if you have major depressive disorder and you also have bipolar disorder, you increase the risk that you will commit suicide by 20 times. Veterans, people who live in rural areas, sexual and gender minorities, middle-aged adults and aged adults, and tribal populations may disproportionately experience the factors that lead to suicide. And those factors include substance misuse, job or financial problems, relationship problems, physical or mental health problems, and or easy access to lethal means. Some people, as we've stated, have disproportionately high rates of suicide. Non-Hispanic, American Indian, and Alaska Natives, and non-Hispanic whites. There are warning signs that someone may be at immediate risk for attempting suicide, and that would be, or would include, that they are talking about death, their own or other people's, or talking about killing themselves. They're saying things like there's no reason to live, that they feel empty, they feel hopeless, they feel trapped, they feel unbearable pain emotionally or physically. They feel that they're a burden to others. They withdraw socially. They start giving away their things, including putting their affairs in order, like drawing a will. They even say goodbye to people. And then they talk and think about death nonstop. Other serious warning signs for a high risk of suicide in the immediate moment would be an extreme mood swing, suddenly changing from very sad to very calm or happy. This would be clearly someone who may have some bipolar disorder. if someone discusses with you their plans or the ways they're researching suicide, or they start doctor shopping and stockpiling pills, or they go and buy a gun, then that is a flashing red light. Talking about feeling great guilt and shame. Using alcohol and drugs more often, acting anxious and agitated, again, would be a mental health precursor. Changing eating or sleeping habits, mental health issue. Showing rage or talking about revenge. So there's obviously a lot of anger involved in suicide. And I think in men, and I've heard before that depression is just anger directed at the self. But you can see that there would be a great deal of rage in a man contemplating suicide in some cases, if only by their chosen method. Do y'all think that asking someone directly then, are you thinking of killing yourself, can be one of the best ways to identify someone at risk, true or false, or do you think it's the worst way, false? So if you're asking someone directly, are you thinking of killing yourself, can be one of the best ways to identify someone at risk. Is that true or is that false? Matthew Braxton says false. Emily Scott says true, false, false, true. Y'all are divided. You're a house divided. Asking someone directly, are you thinking of killing yourself, can be among the best ways to identify someone at risk, true or false. Oh man, this is the best vote we've ever had, y'all. Never had so many of you weigh in. Thank you so much. What a great Friday. Happy Friday, y'all. The fact of the matter is that studies are showing that asking someone whether or not they are thinking about committing suicide in no way influences them to give further or deeper consideration to the thought. So asking someone is a good way to determine whether you should intervene. According to what we were taught in college. Thank you, Candy. I'm glad I'm corroborating what you were taught in college, or maybe the other way around. College is corroborating me. Therapy, psychotherapy is one of the ways that we would seek to intervene if we asked that question and the answer was affirmative. We've discussed both this month and in previous sessions, cognitive behavioral therapy, which essentially helps people learn their thought patterns and replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts or simply other, distracting thoughts. And then we had a full CEU on dialectical behavior therapy, which if you are new to us, you can go to YouTube and search Sean Barnes CarePatrol, and you can find our talk on DBT, which was invented by Marcia M. Linehan, who combined her own Buddhist practice of meditation and mindfulness with the tenets of cognitive behavior therapy. And so it helps someone not only then address those negative thoughts and or replace them, but has been shown to reduce the number of those thoughts coming in. And in the same way, we see that it can help reduce the number of suicidal thoughts coming into the person who has suicidal ideation. There are brief intervention strategies we might do, such as connect them back with friends and family, or reduce or remove the opportunities that they might have. Amy Harvey, I like to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. Questions when assessing for suicide risk. That's one. Can you share that somehow? Can you attach to this chat room? I don't know, but I'd love to see that, Amy. And then there's collaborative care, which some of you, Amy, you may have participated in, where you take a team approach to mental health care, and you have a bevy of folks, both behavioral care health folks as well as primary care folks, and mental health folks who sort of develop a plan with you and develop the best and most effective way for you individually. What if I see a suicidal message on social media? What do I do? Thank you, Amy. I'm going to go ahead and I'll copy that in a minute. Thank you, Amy, so much for sharing that with me and everyone else. What if I see suicidal messages on social media? Matthew Braxton says that she or he, I can't tell from the photograph, so small, I check in. And I think that's a great thing to do, check in. Anyone else weighing in addition to Matthew? What if I see a suicidal message in social media? I think at that point, you do check in, Matthew. You may do more than check in. You know, family and friends, in your case, your friend, I'm sure, would be the first person who would recognize this. Don't leave them alone. Check in and be present. Stay on the phone. And at the same time, you may be dialing 988 or getting on the chat room at 988lifeline.org. Are y'all familiar with 988? I've seen some commercials for it recently. It's, I think, somewhat new on your cell phone. If you are having suicidal thoughts, you can dial 988 and speak to a licensed counselor. They're available 24/7, 365. And if you feel that you're in immediate danger or your friend, in this case, Matthew, is in immediate danger, you call 911. 988, to my knowledge, is a national number, Matthew, but I don't know that to be the case. But I know that the 988lifeline.org obviously would be available to anyone, and it's a chat line, and then you can also text to a crisis hotline, hello, to 741-741. So text hello to 741-741 if you're in crisis, and you can have a text support from a clinician. Suicide prevention, that's a big ask. The protective factors for suicide include support and access to therapy. We've discussed this month that access is the key missing ingredient when it comes to therapy. About 60% of people don't seek help, and many of those, I'm sure, don't seek help because of access and financial barriers. Now, we can reduce access to certain methods, as I mentioned to Matthew, because we know that suicide is impulsive. In fact, 70% of suicide attempts that were unsuccessful, when asked, said that they had made the decision to commit suicide within an hour of thinking of the idea. When we look at things that we've instituted in schools, they've shown mixed results. We certainly could say to ourselves that economic development in underdeveloped areas of our state and cities, that reduced poverty could decrease suicide rates. But I think we all know that that's not likely to happen. We instead could do what I had mentioned earlier, which is try to increase the social connection of folks who are at risk of suicide. Get them involved in your life and with others, especially elderly males over 75. And then people who have attempted suicide, you need to check in quite often and follow up quite often to prevent repeated attacks. Oh, it's 54 minutes after. The code word today for the evaluation is 40 seconds. 40 seconds is the code word. What do I do if I'm in crisis? 988. Also make an appointment with your primary care doctor and prepare before you go by listing the things that are plaguing you, these thoughts of suicide, the thoughts that lead to suicide. Maybe bring someone with you, both for emotional support and also to be a second set of ears. actually it's numbers and then a word. So it's the number 40. I'm sorry, y'all, let me type it in here. It's 40 space, all lowercase seconds. And that's the end of our presentation there. If you can see the screen, is the code word. It is the number 4, the number 0, a space, and then lowercase letters, seconds, SECONDS, 40 seconds. Every 40 seconds today, someone in this world will die of suicide. Every 40 seconds. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to see our other presentations, please go to YouTube, search Sean Barnes, Care Patrol. Some of our more recent presentations are available on our website. That's at carepatrol.com/advisors/Sean Barnes. Our Surveymonkey link, I'll type again in the chat room for you. It is https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/the letter Z as in zoo, T as in Tom, H as in Harry, K as in Kim, G as in girl, and M as in Mary. The code word again is 40 seconds. Thank y'all for joining us. I hope you'll be here on October 10th when Phyllis Grauer, who's y'all don't know, but a fairly celebrated pharmacist, will discuss Gero Pharmacy with us. And she will be the first of 7 total clinicians who will present for us over October on clinical topics. We have 2 nurses. One is on wound care, the other on fall risk. We have a doctor of social work and a licensed professional counselor. We have Phyllis Grauer, the PharmD, and we have Dr. Andrew Duxbury, a gerontologist. So we have, and we have Rusty Lowe, who used to be the head of the Hoover Fire Department. He'll discuss EMS services with us. So I hope y'all will look for an email from me here in the next day or so with our calendar. And if you don't, just go to carepatrol.com and put in your zip code and you'll see my face. Click on it and you'll scroll down the page to our calendar where you can register for every class. Thank y'all so much for being here. Thank you, as always, for your kind words, for your attention, and for the service that you provide me and all of us in Alabama. Thank you so much. I hope y'all have a great weekend. I hope it continues to be a beautiful weekend for all of us. And I hope it remains sunny. Thank you.